The news is bloated with terror-filled headlines as the potential of our new AI overlord becomes less of a fiction and more of a prompt-filled reality. And if you think that this doesn't have the potential to completely shatter immigration as we know it, as well as your job prospects, it is time to think again, my dear fallible human friend. I'm Christy in Canada, and I help immigrants on their journey to Canada. I also brew kombucha, and it is delicious. Today, I'm joined by my friend Mikhail. He has a PhD in astrophysics, was a founder and CTO of an aerospace AI company, is an author, and for funsies owns a vineyard in Argentina. Overachiever. And today, we're going to compare his brew to mine. Let's get on the same page here. Okay, AI is coming. It is going to affect the workforce. And I'm always on a state of kind of excitement and terror. How screwed are we when it comes to comparing a bad episode of The Office to Flight of the Conchords, The Humans Are Dead?
There are no more humans. Finally, robotic beings rule the world. The humans are dead.
Where do we fall right now?
Yeah, I think depending on who you ask, you'll get a very different story. There are very serious AI researchers who think that there should be a moratorium on AI research starting immediately. Okay. And then there are others who think that it's all overblown and, we're still learning about how to use these tools. And the only way that we're actually going to learn how to use them for the benefit of humanity is to actually do experiments and proceed carefully and get feedback and study bias and, those sorts of things, right? Rather than studying AI in the abstract in the hopes of getting all of the alignment questions correct. So if you think about it in terms of movie metaphors, you got Terminator on one end and Star Trek on the other end, where on the deck of the Enterprise, Captain Picard can say computer damage report or whatever, and the computer will take the information, assess it, and deliver a very natural language response. And you can have a natural language conversation with this computer agent, and the computer agent is, has that level of understanding. It's very similar to what ChatGPT is doing for us today.
Okay.
So we're a few steps away from, there's nothing stopping someone from actually doing this, having, text to speech or speech transcription so that you could have an audio conversation with ChatGPT. You wouldn't need to do it via, typing onto a screen.
This feels a lot like Her, the film Her right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're not far from that.
We're not far from that. Okay. So I think I saw a headline somewhere saying that everyone thinks that ChatGPT and AI is going to affect other people's work, but not their own, which was interesting. What do you think about the next 2 to 5 years of how AI is going to affect our business world and the way that we work?
I know it's not going to be a satisfying answer,
okay.
But it's hard to say because there is so much capital being deployed in AI right now. There are probably hundreds of AI startups right now, and over the next 2 to 5 years will collectively raise $100 billion, maybe more. And it's interesting to see what all those companies are going to build. They're going to be things that we haven't imagined yet. A lot of these companies are building tooling and building ways of interacting with these things called foundation models. The foundation models are what powers ChatGPT, the large language model that exists in the back end. And in the past, it was well, this is cute. It does really good translation between different languages. It generates reasonably compelling natural language, but it still makes a lot of embarrassing mistakes. And the approach by companies like OpenAI has been to, well, let's make the models larger and larger. We'll increase the number of parameters. We'll increase the amount of training data. And what we're seeing with the latest model, ChatGPT-4, is you have unexpected behaviors coming out of it. Behaviors that look like the model is reasoning, even if it could just be a facsimile of reasoning, if that makes sense, right? The model is designed to predict what the next token or word in a sentence is going to be.
Yeah.
And that's like structurally all that it's designed to do. It's just that it does it so well that it generates full paragraphs and seems to have nuanced understanding of the prompts that we're giving it. And it can generate haikus or poetry or sermons or whatever you want. You just ask for it in the prompt and it will generate language that corresponds to that.
So I read this article where essentially it was asked to create
A generic drug?
a generic drug, yes.
Uh-huh.
And it did it. I mean, and it's wild. Like that's someone who it would take years of studying and groups to determine that, right?
Right.
How does it do that? And what does that mean for like highly trained professionals which have work that is slightly formulaic in some ways, which turns out most of us do have a very formulaic way of working.
Right. So I think that there's something built into these large language models that allow them to make associations between very disparate parts of the prompt and like with the embeddings of the corpus of the text that they've been trained on. So for instance, artificial intelligence is designed to simulate human-like intelligence on different tasks. So let's say you have a scientist and they would have to read many different papers in chemistry or biology and have a nuanced understanding of the process of creating drugs. And they might need to understand patterns between different papers or concepts in different papers, draw them together, and then synthesize a process, the steps you'd have to follow in order to create a new generic drug. And, a PhD scientist who, is well read in the literature of their field can do this. Speaking not as a chemist or biologist, but like this is similar to how science works, right? Okay. We read papers, we understand what the state of the art is in our fields, and then we generate new ideas and hypotheses for how we can move the field forward. And sometimes those ideas come from other fields entirely, where we make this connection happens in our brains and we have this idea, and then that leads to a novel discovery. What happens when you have an AI that can read every scientific paper in every field and its own process of associating different elements across its entire corpus? It can take a prompt and then actually synthesize those connections and generate a response to your prompt, which is design a generic drug that targets this particular receptor, whatever.
That is insane.
I'm really excited about things like this.
Yeah.
I'm not so worried about it necessarily replacing scientists. I mean, there's still, these processes need to be guided, they need to be fact-checked, they need to be verified. There's going to be, all of the different areas where there's still, in the physical world where humans interact with real physical things, material things. You have to run experiments, etc. And we still have to do clinical trials, a million different things, right? Yeah. And, at least right now, there's no way an AI can do that. I don't think it's going to replace the scientist, but I think that you could have a single human scientist with the power of, 10 scientists behind them becoming 10 times more productive.
Wow. And I imagine in the science field that, but then in like the business world, like your single-handed entrepreneur can essentially have the productivity of like 5 people working for them now all of a sudden.
Right. So I'm a software developer. I write code, and there are lots of different software libraries, lots of different languages. I can't possibly know all of these things, but sometimes I'm required to write code that does a particular task that I remember doing at some point in the past. I forget exactly, what library I need to call and what method to use. Lately, I've been actually asking questions of ChatGPT, like, how would I code this? Like, okay, this is the function that I want to use. How would you parallelize it so it could run across multiple CPUs at the same time? And like, I knew which libraries I wanted to use, but
I know what you just said, but continue.
Sure. The amazing thing was not only did it fully understand what I wanted it to do, it generates code examples and then explains all the different steps in those examples and why, certain methods are used over others. And it is infinitely better than consulting online forums, in the hopes of finding someone who's asked a similar question, or reading all of the documentation for all the different software libraries that I need to use to solve this problem. I mean, that's what I would have done in the past.
Yeah.
And, I don't think that I think every software developer does this. I mean, you have to read the docs. Like, you can't be expected to have everything memorized. It's just that when I can ask a very specific question to an AI that has been trained on all of the documentation, that has read all of the online forums, the responses that it generates, while not always reliable, gets you 99% of the way there. And it's making me a more productive software developer.
But how do you think this really affects like the business world? Like, which industries are going to be impacted the most and quickest?
What we're starting to see is new tools emerging that leverage these types of AI models to do things like generate artwork from a text prompt, which has the potential of disrupting the world of stock photography, right? So there are many photographers who, their bread and butter is generating stock photography. And when you live in a world where, let's say, I need some stock photography for some promotional material, or for my slide deck, or my marketing campaign, or whatever, if I can just go and use a tool like Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or DALL-E 2 and write a text prompt of the kind of stock picture that I want, and in seconds it has generated multiple candidates that I can use, that I can then refine, then this is going to change the way that stock photography works, as one example. A lot of artists who might be employed generating, let's say, assets for video games or in 3D modeling. If I can just describe what it is that I want, a particular texture, a particular scene, there's already tools that combine image generation AIs with Photoshop, with tools like Blender, which are used to create 3D models. Again, it's sort of making a handful of power users much, much more productive, but there might be many artists employed across different industries whose livelihoods were just the generation of these types of assets before, and they're going to have to figure out how they can leverage AI tools to make themselves more productive, or diversify their skills so that they're moving up the value chain.
Yeah.
So that's just one example. I could see similar things happening in coding or in writing, copywriting in particular. Like, copywriting employs a lot of people, in marketing. So, if you can just generate really, really targeted ad campaigns where the copy has been selected and written by ChatGPT, you don't need to hire, the marketing firm that costs a fortune, right? You can generate reasonably good copy for your website, for your promotional material, for your ad campaign, and then deploy that.
Going a little off topic here from our original script, what do you think about like professions with time? I mean, tax. I have family member who works in tax. I have. What about people who work in contractual law? Like, I'm seeing all of this kind of just the productivity will go higher. The asks of people
Right.
less.
Yeah.
Like, is that just a general gist of it? Anything that was low functioning, basic logic is essentially going to become something that you can run through a machine?
Well, if you think about what like a paralegal frequently has to do, which is like go through historical cases to find precedents. If your large language model has already read every case report going back 100 years, and then you would just use a text prompt to have it find all of the precedents for your particular case, you've possibly eliminated a lot of the work that previously would have been done by a paralegal.
All right, you were telling me about a conference earlier. Do you want to mention that a little bit?
Sure. So a couple of months ago in late 2022, I was in San Francisco for a conference. And at this particular conference, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was present, and he gave a Q&A session. And his response to one of the questions was very interesting. He was thinking about the marginal cost of intelligence going to zero, which is like an economics sort of, yeah. But it's this idea that like you can have intelligence on demand. If you have models like GPT-4 and tools like ChatGPT running in the cloud, then they're only limited by the amount of cloud computing capacity that you can put behind it. And even today, if you are using ChatGPT regularly and not paying for their premium plan, you might find that the service is a little bit slow sometimes because it's lurching under the load of so many people using the service. And this can be remedied just by putting more compute power behind these models. If you have these powerful language models running on massive server farms, and they're helping everyone be 10 times more productive, they're helping scientists make more discoveries, coders write more code, marketers write more copy. It's like having intelligence on demand, and you're just basically paying the electricity bill for your computers to get more intelligence powering your workflows.
This whole channel is about immigration, and essentially you have this catalyst for disrupting the workforce. Well, this is going to absolutely affect immigration policy in the long run. What do you see happening?
So, not speaking as an expert on Canadian immigration, my understanding is that immigration policy in Canada seems to be shifting towards the areas in our labor force where we have the greatest need, the biggest deficits. A lot of that seems to be in the areas of the trades. So Canada suffers from a shortage of affordable housing, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the big reasons is that new housing just can't be built fast enough. And one of the reasons why we can't build houses fast enough is because there aren't enough people in the skilled trades, the builders, the carpenters, the plumbers, the electricians. And for whatever reason, fewer people have decided to choose those professions as a career. And so in order to try to remedy some of those deficits, Canada is trying to shift its immigration policy towards those trades. And the good thing is that because these trades or these careers touch on the physical world, currently AI is not going to affect them. I mean, until we have highly dexterous humanoid robots that can do the same types of, fine motor skills that a human can, I don't think those careers are in jeopardy.
But the classic arts student, like that was already always like a bit of a question mark about employability. The business students that come out this way, like, do you see that dwindling with time, or does Canada still, because Canada, quite frankly, has an education system which it brings in immigrants and they retrain them, and it makes quite a bit of money as an industry in and of itself. Do we still, I don't know, this is speculation, do we still continue doing that, or do you see such a mass change in the market that people start freaking out and like voting down immigration in the future? Sorry, not an immigration specialist, but I'm curious, like, is this how far it might go?
I mean, I am nervous about trends towards populism. It's difficult to say what,
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot for a really hard question.
Right. These are difficult questions, and I don't think I'm very qualified to answer them. But in a world where an AI can replace a lot of low-skill tasks, then the kinds of people that you want in your workforce are those the most capable of critical thinking, who have a broad arts background or a liberal arts background, or leverage these tools in smart ways, right? Like, I was giving the example earlier of being a software developer and using ChatGPT to make myself more productive. If I wasn't already knowledgeable enough about software development to be able to judge what I was getting back from these AIs, and I was just blindly copying and pasting code examples, that could be a disaster. And it wouldn't necessarily make me more employable or more productive. So it's still the human intelligence that is wielding the artificial intelligence in productive ways.
Okay.
And so I don't think that education is wasted in an age of AI. And I mean, one of the fears that I have is tools like ChatGPT being leaned on so heavily by young people, students who are just coming through high school and university and having all of their essays and critical thought pieces being written by a large language model, rather than developing the cognitive skills to be able to generate persuasive essays or persuasive arguments. That's concerning.
That is actually like one of my deep fears as well. A lack of critical ability, because you have not basically practiced that. And that is like essentially the entire idea behind like a bachelor's degree and taking a few credits in other fields. Usually the bachelor's degree in Canada is that you just think a little bit more broadly. But I mean, if you can get such specific examples for most things through a chat,
Right.
ChatGPT or through AI, like we will essentially, people will get lazier. So we got really negative there for a second, but I'm very curious. I can see the landscape changing in the world of business because of AI, and then I can see it having an impact on post-secondary education institutions. What do you see happening? Like things are going to have to change because like we don't want to have functionally illiterate people. How do universities combat that, especially because they're slow-moving institutions in some ways?
So I'm still old enough that there was a time when I had to write essays by hand.
Oh yeah, same age.
Right. Right. So they got all the students in a giant assembly hall, and you're sitting at a tiny desk, and you have these paper booklets, and at the top of the hour, you're given the exam, and you have to write a persuasive essay by hand. And I mean, I don't envy the universities today and how they are going to deal with this, because any take-home essay could now be written by ChatGPT. There are some people who are working on these tools that can detect whether a text has been written by a language model, and there's some ways of looking at like the statistical word choices that are being made, etc., and seeing whether that resembles the types of text patterns that are emerging out of these language models. But I see that as a losing battle, because there's going to be new variants of these models that come out, or
new machines to combat that.
Right, exactly. It's just going to be an arms race. So I think the only way to guarantee that a piece of writing is not being written by an AI at the university level is to actually force students to write things by hand. Which, right, it feels, medieval almost, but I mean, we had to do it.
Yeah. So people come to Canada often for social services and healthcare, and AI is going to be a huge disruptor in society. Do you think that what we currently have for Canadians, permanent residents, people who are here on visas, is still a good place to come to in the future, in your opinion? Can we weather the storm of disruption?
Canada has some of the best universities in the world, and especially in the area of AI. I mean, we have several of the top AI researchers in the world. If you think like Jeffrey Hinton or Joshua Bengio or Richard Sutton, these are, I mean, in the field of AI, they're legends, and all of them are based in Canada. And it's a great place to learn the types of skills, whether or not you are pursuing a career in AI or just pursuing an education. Canada is a great place to be. Now, for the immigrants that are entering Canada, sort of not with the intention of attending a Canadian university, but just, they're they're coming here for work or family or whatever the case may be. I mean, it's tough to say. I don't think any country is really prepared for what is going to happen with AI. I think Canada's probably better positioned than many places, just being a less unequal society than some other countries, and having generally a high quality of life. So I would.
Kind of what I was hoping you would agree with. It's still a good place for the long term. But you make a really interesting point, and I wanted to chat with you about this because I remember in my communication studies, you would have these steps of technology that happen, but then sometimes you would have technologies happen which had leaps. So, for instance, next to the road came the telegraph,
Mhm.
and then on the telegraph line came the telephone, and then on that, like internet. But then in some places where that infrastructure never existed,
Right.
when cell phones came around, all of a
Mhm.
sudden you had this leap in technology.
Right.
There are countries, like I'm from South Africa, where there are huge education gaps, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And we see Canada being a very well educated country overall, so things
Mm.
potentially bode well. Do you think AI is one of those technologies that allows for a society to move forward very quickly, or does
Mm.
it make it way worse for those countries that have versus those that have not?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So as of right now, ChatGPT is still free for the public to use
Yeah.
while it's in a research phase. That may not always be the case, and certainly if you're building applications on top of it, you're using an API, and that costs money. Um, they have to monetize these things somehow. The compute costs are eye-watering.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but the thing that I'm excited about is that they are democratizing access in some way, right? It doesn't matter whether you are in Canada or in South Africa, you can access this service and you can ask it questions and you can help, you can leverage these tools to make you better at your job. There are people working on the problem of using AI um, to do education better, right? So if imagine ChatGPT, but modified slightly so that it was a personal tutor. So it can now tailor its responses to you at the skill level that you are, by just sort of in the background injecting things into the prompt where you're saying, explain this like I'm X years old. And for X, it's whatever the age level of the student in that grade level. And then have this tool uh, teaching, but it has access to the world's knowledge on the back end.
Yeah.
And so now you're democratizing potentially a world-class education to anyone with an internet connection. And so there is the hope that used in the right way, uh, you can create more equality rather than more inequality.
That's a positive thing. But we did also speak about um, India and entry level coding positions. What
Right.
do you see? Like a lot of the world has gone offshore with a lot of its services into India, and that's been a boom to the economy there. What happens now? It's a very strong part of the Indian economy is just kind of vested into that, and things like
Right.
ChatGPT could pretty much wipe that out.
I mean, it remains to be seen. There was a recent piece, I believe, in Bloomberg where they were saying that, yeah, there are 5 million coding jobs in India across various like outsourcing firms, and these are, you know, some of them will be entry level coding jobs, and they're taking on projects for large uh, Western firms that are outsourcing some of that software development. If software development can be done more affordably using an AI, then perhaps there won't be the same need for um, I don't know, outsourcing of this type of labor. So I don't know how that's going to play out. It could, I mean, India also has some terrific universities. It has a workforce that is hungry to get ahead, to use the most cutting edge tools. I think that they will learn to leverage these tools. And I think that like it won't necessarily be this disaster that some people are forecasting.
I mean, you and I've read some books about this as well, like the idea that there are generative jobs which have yet to be, we can't even imagine them just yet, because we are thinking through the lens of what the world looks like right now and scared of this disruption. But I mean, there was a point in time when Facebook did not exist, and the idea of a social media manager sounded like fairy dust being sprinkled around. But now these are actual legitimate job titles,
Absolutely.
which exist.
And people making a living as content creators on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
That is a career that some people choose, and they are rocking it.
Yeah. No, it's so there is, whenever we look at this entire situation, there is this sense of uncertainty and disruption, but more of like that's just what every bit of new technology that comes and it disrupts things a little bit does all the time.
Right. I mean, there's almost a sort of like joke about the Luddites and people saying, you know, this time it's different. and usually that proves to be wrong. It doesn't end up being different. But what if this time it's different?
What if this time it's different? Well, okay, we've gonna move ahead a little bit. Canada and the rest of the world went through COVID. And Canada also had essentially a benefit program that went out, like a universal basic income scenario. So if you lost your job, you got some money, and it was supposed to kind of help sustain our economic purchases so that things didn't collapse. What do you think about that? Like, we're going to see a lot of wealth being created through this. We're also going to see a lot of disruption. Is this a time to usher in universal basic income, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there are some people who are kicking around this idea of a universal basic income, where in anticipation of all of the disruption that AI will bring, those left in the lurch need to be guaranteed some kind of basic means to live on. And also, if AI is so incredibly productive and generates so much new wealth, then couldn't we all just enjoy a life of leisure?
Yes.
This sort of this Keynesian dream of you know, I don't know, working fewer days and enjoying greater leisure. I don't know how that's going to pan out, right? I think Elon Musk was recently asked whether he was in favor of a universal basic income in light of AI, and his response was after AGI. And I should maybe define what that is. So AGI is artificial general intelligence. And what we have today are a lot of specialized intelligences that can do text generation very well, or can do image processing, or can do natural speech synthesis, or these sorts of things. And these are specialized AI tools that have been trained to do each of these different tasks. And none of them are yet a general intelligence where they're doing, you know, the broad types of tasks and roles that a human intelligence can do, right? But we could get to a general intelligence, and many believe that we will. You know, already we're seeing like what are called multimodal models, where you know you're just interacting with let's say ChatGPT, but it is doing a wider and wider range of tasks, and it can begin to process imagery. It can, you know, begin to do all these things. There's people developing plugins now for ChatGPT so that it can expand the scope of its capabilities. And we may get to a point where it is a general intelligence. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It just means that it's general. There is this possibility that an AGI can recursively improve upon itself, right? So the point where the AI is writing code that then ends up being used by the AI, and the AI is optimizing for its own capabilities, and it is becoming more and more capable and intelligent. There's this sort of runaway scenario where human intelligence is left in the dust, and the the AGI will look at human intelligence the way human intelligence look at like primate intelligence.
We cannot give this thing arms.
Well, this is why some people in the AI community are calling for a moratorium, because there is this chance that maybe we're getting close to that runaway scenario, and we should press the pause button before going any further. And I mean, OpenAI has stated that they're not currently building GPT-5, the next sort of iteration of this model. They're going to work with GPT-4 for a while and explore its capabilities and its risks. And that's good, I think. I don't know if it satisfies everyone. But this concern that I think Elon Musk is referring to is this superintelligence explosion, where what happens when you have a superintelligent AGI that has literally replaced, most human abilities. Like it writes code better than I ever could, and it can talk to my manager and send emails and run, all of the meetings that we have, and they can do all of these things. And there's really no way that I can add any value there. Say,
Comes a bit of a philosophical question at that point, like, what are we doing? If it can do everything for us, what are we spending our time on?
Well, I mean, we may be speculating prematurely. There are some people who think this is right around the corner. There are some people who think it's 100 years away, and there are others who think it'll never happen. So I don't know. But if there is some large disruption where a significant fraction of the labor force is unemployed and we are in a pitchforks and torches type situation, then there may need to be some kind of a universal basic income. How you would fund that is unclear, right? I don't think that, having ultra high marginal tax rates is going to go over very well. And then how would you prevent, the most affluent in society from just moving their wealth to other countries, for instance? What I was thinking maybe as an alternative, and again, like just speculating, like how could you share the wealth of an AI more broadly? Maybe there could be like a kind of a royalty structure, the way that we have with, fossil fuels, where maybe the state, in exchange for cheap electricity, receives a royalty that allows it to benefit from the wealth generation that AI brings. Or when, and I think it's really only just a question of when, like when AI start actively trading on the stock market, maybe we could, levy a small fee on every transaction. Just, these are ideas. I'm not an economist. Not, like this is a really big,
It's a really big question.
kind of question. But there are other ways too in which society could benefit and like rather than sort of solving kind of the revenue side, you can solve the cost side, like things that are very expensive, like healthcare and education. If AI can be leveraged in kind of the examples that we saw before with the democratization of education, if more people can get access to education, if education can be made more affordable, if AI leads to medical breakthroughs like amazing generic drugs that potentially have the cost of enabling healthcare to be delivered at far lower cost. Maybe there are ways in which the benefits of AI could actually accrue to everyone.
So Peter Diamandis wrote this book on abundance, and it was Naomi, my roommate. She had.
I remember.
I didn't read it, but I heard him speak, and there's this whole idea of exactly that, like you spoke about. The marginal cost of intelligence being essentially zero, and like all information and knowledge kind of being out there for us to use. Isn't there like a crushing weight of too much information? I mean, this can generate so much content, and it seems like it could even make it like an iterative process where it could just like keep making more, and people will have all these tools that they can. Like I imagine like one person production teams creating something they could never dream of.
Yeah.
Like, do we see a splintering of society where we can go so deep down into niches that we want that
Hmm.
we never actually have to. We never watch the same sitcom. We never watch the same. We don't even see the same news anymore because we are in echo chambers of
Hmm.
liberal versus conservative versus information has been created by Russia. Like, what? Yeah, what does too much abundance look like thanks to AI?
Too much abundance. I mean, I worry about things like the mass production of misinformation. Um, but I mean, others have already sort of spoken a lot about that. What I find kind of interesting is that AI could be used to generate really, really bespoke content just for you, so that when you log into Netflix, uh, you would ask for a comedy, and it would write a, a novel comedy that no one else has seen before, with characters that it has learned you connect with and appreciate, and a plot that is compelling and unexpected, and you get so much enjoyment out of this new sitcom that you
Only
know
you've seen it. That's wild. That's terrifying as well. Do you think? I wonder if it ever can get that good. I never, because I can imagine it making the cheesy Hallmark Christmas movies, 100%.
right.
But can it produce the next like Fleabag?
I mean, it's we talked about like
Yeah, Drake. Well, you think about Drake? Because I was like, well,
it's not what I was thinking, but go for it. Let's
well, Drake in the Weekend create this banger hit. Was not that amazing, but it's decent enough
well,
that it's
they
like
didn't. Their likenesses
their
did.
likenesses did, and it was good enough that I was like, I listened to it a little bit. I was like, this is actually not bad. Like if I didn't know it was AI, I wouldn't know.
Right. So if you can take lyrics that ChatGPT has generated and you can clone the voices and likenesses of your favorite artists and have them sing those lyrics, which you then, you generate some music to, or you work with a drum machine or whatever. AI is going to affect all of these, like, touch every part of the music creation process. It's not that hard to imagine that it could start producing hits.
Yeah.
Um, how these artists will react to their likenesses being used, I think, is going to result in some interesting lawsuits. But at a certain point, you don't need their likenesses anymore. You can just generate a new avatar of a person that doesn't exist in real life, but has a great voice, and you know looks great, and dances as well
24
as
hours, 7 days a week. Which is just okay. Which kind of
you joke, but there's probably someone in Silicon Valley right now pitching this idea
Yeah.
and being handed bags of money.
Yeah, but also just like again the human experience. Like, what is culture? Who are the culture makers in the future with AI? Like,
I don't know,
I don't know.
Christy.
Going back to immigration and nationhood,
Mhm.
this whole idea, like, it's so funny because my daughter, her grandpa is teaching her to sing "Oh Canada," so she has her little rendition of it, and I think about like these weird moments that I have, like, oh, do I want to impart nationhood onto such an impressionable mind at this point, which is just busy learning words? But nationhood by itself is an imagined construct. Benedict Anderson spoke about this, and this idea that we are a nation is just because we all agree. It's like the currency and money. We all agree it has value, thus it has value. How do we see AI potentially erasing borders? I mean, we're a global village now, already the internet connected us. AI now is essentially going to make intelligence generalized.
Right.
We all still have statehoods and nationhood
Hmm.
that exists and passports exist, but is there a fundamental change that happens to the idea of nations, and how deep and dark can this go?
Hmm. Well, so what comes to mind there is what some commentators are already saying about the United States. It's not one nation anymore. It is at least two nations because you have uh, two different uh, political tribes
Mm-hmm.
that hold massive ideological sway over their adherents, and these two camps largely don't see eye to eye anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be other tribes within that
Mm-hmm.
makeup as well. And one concern is that, if AI becomes so good at creating um, either bespoke content that's so tailored to us that we no longer have a shared experience with other people because we're just consuming content that is entirely unique to us, or uh, worse than that, there's so much disinformation that we no longer trust the shared stories that we hear in society anymore, then we may no longer feel much of an affinity to somebody that happens to reside within the same geographic borders that exist. And so, how do we restore a sense of community or a sense of shared identity, just so that we can get along? Um, I mean, maybe it's not going to be quite so dire. I hope that our shared humanity will still allow us to get along with our neighbors and believe in uh, uh, higher values that bind us together in humanity and decency.
Yeah.
But what's more interesting is sort of the tribes that could form around other interests or other values. Um, so I recently read this book called The Network State by Balaji Srinivasan, I think, and he writes about um, these online communities forming around shared values that will ultimately form kind of like organizations or these or mini nations, and they will interact with each other. Their interactions will be recorded on a blockchain. They might eventually crowdfund physical infrastructure like a building, and then you end up with this like archipelago of people who are part of kind of the same online nation, if you will, but they're distributed across the planet. But they come together around a shared vision. Maybe it's a particular religious system that they all share, a particular set of values, a particular diet obsession or something, right? But you'll find your tribe online, and then you might join this networked organization, and you might choose to contribute to it in real ways, and those transactions will be logged to a blockchain. And the hope, at least that, as described in this book, is that eventually some of these network states will gain diplomatic recognition by traditional states.
Which is curious because a lot of fighting when it comes to states is over resources. And like the whole identity piece around who has what.
Right.
So how does that fit in, do you think? Having a network state.
Well,
like, what sway do they have if they don't have anything to win or lose?
Well, when you're online, you're almost like creating new land, right? There's no new land, barring some reclamation projects, and maybe
or
some.
Trip to Mars.
Well, yeah, or that. Barring, going to space, there isn't much new land emerging. So most of the land has been spoken for, and most of the resources have been spoken for, which causes tension and competition and potentially conflict. Um, when the resources that you're creating are digital resources that have no physical footprint, um, and the currency is knowledge and effort, and the creative task, you're essentially creating a new frontier, right? You're in a new frontier, and you don't have to fight over resources because the resources are, whatever you and the other members of your tribe are creating. Eventually these things will touch the physical world, and there will still be, people still need to, get a sandwich or something.
And on that uplifting note, click here to see why immigrants are kissing Canada goodbye. Till next time.